Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts.
As part of New York One's continuing coverage of the anniversary of September 11, this is a day in time.
September 11th was a blur for most of us. It was an ordinary September day to start, but it all changed very suddenly just before 9 o'clock that morning, although it wasn't clear from the beginning exactly what was happening. Some New Yorkers were in their usual morning routine, and they were with us or one of the other TV networks from the beginning. But many other people were far from television, far from the comfort of home. Some were running for safety, some were responding to help. Too many were trying to get in touch with loved ones who didn't come home. Some people left the city, some stayed at work, some congregated in the streets. So as much as television became the community's link in the days after September 11th, on that first day, a lot of people were elsewhere. As part of our reflection on September 11th, we're going to take you back through New York One's coverage that day. This isn't meant to be a story about us. There are plenty of heroes who deserve that sort of attention. But it is a story through our eyes, the reporters and anchors and everybody else at New York One who brought you the story on September 11th. We'll hear their reflections, you'll see the pictures, and you'll hear our words as they were heard in the hours after the attacks. I was on the anchor desk that morning of September 11th. We begin there as I got the first report of a fire at the World Trade Center. This is a live picture from our camera on the Empire State Building looking toward the World Trade Center. A 3-alarm fire and a report of an explosion somewhere in the World Trade Center. You can see the plume of smoke from the top of one of the World Trade Center towers.
You hear over the fire scanners, you hear them calling that it's a 3rd alarm fire at the World Trade Center. And within about 30 seconds, or what seemed like 30 seconds, it was up to a 5-alarm, 6-alarm fire. And 6-alarm fire at the World Trade Center. What's going on? And all of a sudden, the viewer tip lines that we maintain, they all lit up at once. And at that point, we knew something bad had happened.
I was at the Brooklyn Museum of Art. It was one of the only times on the morning shift that we didn't have a shooter with us. So we got the call. We thought it was a joke in the beginning because we were so short-staffed, and we realized it wasn't. So we got into the truck, went through the streets of Brooklyn, which by this point were packed. People were just staring at the World Trade Center. And looking to us at stoplights that we hit as if we had any more information, but we didn't. We were listening to the radio at that time.
I received a phone call actually from one of my uncles who live in the South. They know what I do for a living, that I'm a cameraman or a video journalist, and I'm always out in the field, especially around in New York. And my uncle said to me, Baron, what the is going on in New York?
We were at Asher Levy, the school on the Lower East Side, polling location, and the cliche that's been said 1,000 times since is that it started as if it was any other day, and indeed it did.
Good morning, Pat. Certainly there is a lot at stake. Nearly 250 candidates are seeking office on this primary day.
We were listening to the radio in the live truck between our 8:30 hit and our 9 o'clock live shot, and word came over the radio that a plane struck the World Trade Center.
We literally, when we got that first report and went on the air with the picture looking from the Empire State Building down toward the World Trade Center, we knew that there was a lot of smoke. And we knew that the firefighters had been called. And it was only over the next few minutes that information started coming in. And a lot of the information came from viewers who were watching at home, saw that we were trying to figure out what was going on, and they started filling in the pieces.
I heard an enormous explosion, then I heard another enormous explosion, and it scared me. I looked out the window, and an enormous tire, what appeared to be a tire, smashed down on the street in front of me.
So when we looked up, we literally, at the very second, saw this plane just plow into the building, a huge plume of fire, which I assume was the fuel from the airplane. But if you look at the World Trade Center from our vantage point, you can actually just see a complete outline of an airplane making a left bank.
This idea of taking the calls, gathering all this information, just delivering whatever we could to the viewer continued through past 9 o'clock, 9:10, and then a few minutes later, again, we're watching this live shot. We never took this live picture off because we had this perspective from the Empire State Building. We're watching the shot, and all of a sudden, It appears that all the concentration of the emergency crews and the fire, the smoke is coming from the North Tower, and then suddenly there's this explosion at the South Tower. Now there's another explosion down to the left side on the second World Trade Center tower. And from the shot that I was looking at, I couldn't see how these two incidents were related. And I think I articulated that on television, that this was simply puzzling to me because I knew the geography of the two towers, and although from the perspective of this long shot, it looks like they're very close together. And in fact, there's considerable distance between where those two towers were. So just because there was a fire on one shouldn't mean that there's any problem with the other. It should almost have been business as usual at the other. And yet there was suddenly this explosion there, and I couldn't understand why. Didn't think at that moment that it could be another plane hitting the buildings. It was a couple of minutes later, again, one of these viewers calling in with information, and this wasn't anybody who was necessarily close to the scene, but this viewer said, if you take a look at that videotape you were showing and look back in the distance, you can actually see this speck, and it approaches the tower, and then it disappears from view for a minute, and it hits.
Difficult to find the words to describe sheer destruction.
Absolutely stunned. This is one of the darkest days in our city's history. It is unbelievable. There is a tire from one of the planes. It is about 6 to 7 feet. It is a large tire, and it is on its side. It is ripped apart.
Some of the crew was actually on the West Side Highway turning right into the location, and they saw the second plane hit the second tower. And we kind of knew at that point that this was not just an isolated incident. This was an attack.
When we saw the plane coming, I mean, that really freaked me out completely. I just stopped. I panicked. I just stopped, and we looked at each other. I cried. I didn't, as Amanda said, she saw tears in my eyes.
I hear a bunch of construction workers screaming. You know, they're like, "Oh my God!" So I yell out my window, "What happened?" And like the other tower's on fire. So I finally pass this building, and I see both of them on fire, smoking. Actually, heavy smoke coming out of them. Then that's when I knew that this was not a regular fire. You know, that I wouldn't be doing the primaries that day.
As I got to the office, the second plane hit a minute later, and all hell broke loose. And Steve Paulus, the head of the station, said to me, "Get in makeup and get on the set fast." So I ran into the makeup room and got ready, and as I was sitting in there, like furiously throwing on blush and lipstick and whatever, I was thinking, oh my God, people are dying. Lots of people are dying. And I sort of knew that it had to be a terrorist act, that when the second plane hit, that was sort of like the confirmation that it was not an errant Cessna, but in fact something intentional.
Actually, right as we were going over the Manhattan Bridge, we heard a second plane hit. Billy and I both looked at each other and said, "It's terrorists. We're under terrorist attack."
It was a frightening revelation at that point, because if there was any doubt in your mind that this was a deliberate attack, that to me was the moment that vanished. You knew that two planes hitting within half an hour of each other couldn't have. If If there's any question about whether the FBI is taking this as a possible terrorist attack, we may have an answer in the fact that they have sealed the Lincoln and Holland tunnels now as a precaution. Those tunnels are sealed at both ends, so they are not allowing traffic to pass through the Lincoln and Holland tunnels. Path train service is suspended.
The cops are stopping us. Everywhere we go, it's like, no, you can't go through, you can't go through. This is an isolated thing. We can't let anyone through. No one can get by. Frozen zone. I saw what was like a piece of machinery. It was like on Church Street, over by Park Place. And I shoot it, not knowing what it was. And then someone said, oh my God, it's a piece of the plane. So I'm shooting it, shooting people looking at it, people's reaction. And the whole thing, the whole time, I still don't realize what I'm witnessing, what's going on. I still have no clue what the hell's happening.
We now have word from law enforcement sources that both of these airplanes striking the World Trade Center were flights that came out of Boston, and if I'm getting this information correctly, that both airplanes were hijacked out of Boston, flown to New York, and struck the side of the World Trade Center. The city now on high terrorist alert. Plenty of cameras at that school in Florida for what was to be a routine event with the president making a speech in front of some school children. And there's one moment that you always think of as you look back at that, where the president learned about the second plane crash. Andrew Card came up to him and just briefly whispered at him and told him what had happened. And you'll never forget the look on Bush's face at that time.
Today we've had a national tragedy. Two airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act.
By this time in the morning, we knew that there were hundreds or thousands of people who were on those top floors of the towers who just didn't have a way out. And we started to get pictures where you could see that there were people behind those windows. There were people who had broken windows to try to get a breath of fresh air. There were people waving to try to let people know where they were. And as we learned through the day, there were many people who felt that their only way out was to jump from the buildings.
I kept thinking, how bad is it up there that people are choosing to jump as the better option?
I can hear myself saying, oh, Shaz, I got the jumpers, and thinking, like, not knowing at that time that, like, there wasn't, like, a trampoline, and they weren't, like, okay at the bottom.
You have to ask the question now about structural damage to the World Trade Center towers, and whether we'll see those towers occupied anytime in the years to come.
We had known within, I would say, just a few minutes of the second plane hitting that there were other possible hijacked planes in the air, and that was really scary.
Associated Press now reporting an aircraft has crashed into the Pentagon. So now this is the third apparently deliberate air crash. The first two into the towers of the World Trade Center, the third crashing into the Pentagon, and the White House is being evacuated now.
There's this slow process of realizing that the magnitude of this disaster is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the circles are wider and wider and wider of people who are affected by this.
We had all these developments in New York, and that was more than enough to keep track of. But suddenly we started getting these reports through the wire services and then through other sources about what was going on in Washington. And clearly the big event there was the plane crash into the Pentagon, but there was all this other information as well about evacuations in other federal buildings, evacuations at the Capitol, at the White House. They were pulling people out, and there was word that there may have been another plane destined for somewhere in Washington. So all of that was happening, and yet we still had a tremendous number of developments in New York that we were keeping track of at the same time. A commercial aviation service across the country and all aircraft takeoffs have been suspended by the Federal Aviation Administration. That an unprecedented step taken by the FAA just a moment ago in the wake of this apparent deliberate and concerted effort to crash these airplanes into these buildings in New York and Washington. So Kristen Shaughnessy had been able to get very close to the towers, and she found a payphone that was near the foot of one of the towers, called in, and so we put her on the air live, and I started into question and answer with her about what she was seeing. As she's talking, we're looking at one of the live pictures of the towers, and suddenly I saw what she saw and heard, which was that something was happening at the top of that tower and it was starting to crumble. And that was one of the most frightening moments of the whole morning for me, because I knew how close she was to the tower.
Oh, it's just coming down, Pat. It is just coming down.
Watch the right
it's
side.
exploding.
The building is ripping apart.
It is billowing. Pat, the debris is flying. I'm going to run.
Okay. All right. We hope that Kristen was not in a position where she would have been injured by that, but the tower is literally crumbling into the streets of Manhattan there.
When I first saw it, I think I said it before you could kind of see it on the air because it was right in front of me, and it just was like a pancake. Just every floor just pancaking down on the next one. And it was surreal, and I didn't move at first because I said, I'm far enough away, I'm 2 streets away. Well, we have a 110-story building coming down, it's not far enough. So the FBI agents who were on the street, the only ones on the street at that point, FBI agents, firemen, cops, and some people who were still trying to get out. But for the most part, it was closed off. And they started running. And this FBI agent grabbed me and he said, you better run or you're going to die.
It was probably 30 seconds before I was able to leave that idea behind and really concentrate on the overall magnitude of what was happening, because her story at that moment was just typical of what was happening for thousands of people who had gathered on the streets in that area, who had evacuated from other buildings, who had evacuated from the Twin Towers. And all of them were faced with the same thing, where they were walking out of the area in sort of an orderly way, thinking that they're not going to be able to come back to work till the next day. And then there was this rumble and the tower coming down and the smoke and the dust that just covered the whole area. And it was sort of a process of a few seconds to realize the magnitude of that.
We were able to get all the way down to the Stuyvesant High School overpass. And at that point, we were stopped by a crossing guard. In my view, luckily we were stopped, because I don't know if she would have let us go further or if she would have directed us onto a side street. We were at Chambers Street and West Street when I heard this incredible roar.
Oh my God! Shit! Get out of the car! Get out! Get out! Hey! Sir! Get him out! Get out of the way! Stop! Stop!
I was resting my shoulder because we had no tripods. Resting my shoulder and looking up again, because you can't help but look at that burning building. And that's when we saw the explosion of debris. And that's when, I quickly switched gears. I'm not shooting anymore.
When the building collapsed, that's when the real panic set in, when the building collapsed, because I think most people thought, I know I did, thought it was a third plane. Nobody ever, you just saw this big cloud and all the debris falling. I mean, imagine Trade Center falling. And I definitely thought it was a third plane. And then I figured, well, a third one, it could very easily be a fourth and a fifth and a sixth.
Exactly.
And that's why I took off.
So I stopped on West Street and I looked up and I was counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, counting down how many floors above the impact on the South Tower. And as I was doing so, the sound of the tower started to crumble as I just stood there and stared at it. And it was just, the sound is what stays with me.
Everyone was screaming and holding their faces, and then it's like you didn't want to look back because you didn't know what was behind you. And so we were just running, not even knowing where we were going.
A man about 35 years old, covered with soot, carrying an attaché case, you know, looked like the lawyer type, was walking around in a circle, like, and I said to him, you look like you're in shock, why don't you step up in the ambulance? And he said, no, I'm all right. And okay, he said he was all right, and he started to do it again, and I said, no, I grabbed him by the arm and says, you have to go in the ambulance, be smart. And as he stepped up and back in the ambulance, he just slipped out of my hand and he just died on the floor.
I remember telling a couple of people with cameras to get as close as they could. And that sort of may not, looking back on it on hindsight, may have been a great idea. But I was, the news instinct is to get there, get to the scene, talk to people, but this was going to be a different scene. When the second plane hit, I remember trying to tell people when I could on the cell phone or on the Nextel, think about safety now. Maybe you shouldn't get as close as you can, and it turns out to me maybe that was a good thing, because when that first tower fell, I thought I had killed a whole bunch of my colleagues.
It was one of the most surreal experiences as a person and even as a journalist, because it's one of these things you hear about, you see on television, you see in movies, you probably even read about. But to be there, to actually see it, smell it, feel it, even taste it, it's surreal, it's unimaginable. It's something that I felt that was completely out of my reach. And I see a guy on a gurney, and I start filming that, them strapping him up. He has a neck brace on. They bring him down to the front of the steps now. And we're still on Barclay and Church, which is about a block and a half from where the towers were. In the gurney, he has the neck brace on. His eyes like pop open. So when I look up, all I saw was smoke. I head down the block, running. I didn't think about anything about the camera, the shot. I'm just thinking to get the hell out of there, because I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's coming down. All I see is smoke. I get to the end of the block, and I turn around, and all I saw was just this blob of smoke just coming down the block. Papers, people running. I pick up the camera, and I start shooting it. And I'm like, what the hell what is this? What's happening?
I saw after that first tower fell, then groups of school kids evacuating this school right there across from the high school. And I was amazed. The kids seemed rattled, but even more than the kids, the teachers had they had stunned looks on their faces. I remember some crying. I remember seeing people pass us just looking as if they were about to collapse. Just that one man who was sitting there with dust on him, this forlorn look on his face, you knew he had seen horror. His face is just an indelible impression right now in my mind.
It's now 10 o'clock. That means it was roughly an hour after the initial impact, which seemed to impact roughly the top, I would say, 1/4 of the building. And now we see the building has apparently crumbled.
There was chaos for the next few minutes. We had this flow of information coming in now because we had so many of our own people in the area. They were phoning to say how far the dust cloud had spread. There were aerial shots, just seeing this white cloud enveloping all of lower Manhattan. And it was a blur for the next few minutes.
We actually saw a huge portion of that second tower go down, at which point tens of thousands of people started running north along the West Side Highway and the Esplanade, where people are usually biking and jogging, and there's definitely an evacuation in progress now with everyone headed north. Frightening sight to behold.
New York One's Kristen Shaughnessy was on the phone with us a few moments ago as One World Trade Center literally disintegrated before our eyes. Kristen, I can't tell you how relieved I am to hear your voice.
Thank you very much. It was quite a scene, Pat. As I said, I was looking up at it, and right when we were talking, I saw it come down. And they literally, I have to commend the law enforcement. They got everybody, it seemed, as best they could where I was, out of that area. So now what they're doing is they're evacuating everyone to either Midtown or the Upper East Side. People were lined up here at the phones, and they said, no more phone service. You really have to get out of this area because we don't know what is going to happen next.
I was actually going to try to stay on the phone because in my head, you're not thinking rationally, I guess. I didn't know if everybody understood how bad it was. So I'm thinking if I drop the phone, they're going to be annoyed that we lost this live presence on the phone, which is silly in retrospect, but that's what I was thinking. But when this FBI agent said to me, you got to run, I mean, I didn't think twice because he was running. It wasn't like he was sticking around. He was right alongside me.
And when I told this story many times over the last year or so, I've always said it was a half an hour before we found Kristen. But I was watching the tape the other day, and it was just 7 minutes. And it was the longest 7 minutes ever. And then I heard word in my ear that they had found Kristen and that she was okay. And it was the only time that my voice broke on the air, and I said, I'm very happy to report that Kristen is okay. And we found her, and I was so relieved and grateful. And so aware that so many people weren't going to have good news that day.
I'm hesitant to get too far into the speculation here, but I would think it unlikely that any commercial pilot would steer his plane into the World Trade Center. He'd more likely crash the plane into the harbor, even if there was a gun to his head. And you've got to wonder if this was organized enough that the hijackers actually had someone capable of flying the airplane.
As soon as I step out of the car and I'm opening the trunk to get my camera, it's like it's snowing down there, you know, and just particles floating around everywhere. And the first person we see is a worker from one of the towers, and he's covered in soot. He has all of this dust and debris on him, and he's just on the corner. He's coughing, you know, he's coughing heavily, like he's choking. We're like, what happened? You know, where were you?
I was in the lobby, just about ready to go outside when we heard a secondary explosion. And we started running toward the center of the building to get away from the glass, and everything. All the glass just shattered, and the place was black with smoke.
The feeling down there, you know, people, it was weird because all I saw were people just standing there, like, with their mouths open, you know, just gawking at it, just staring, you know. They weren't saying anything, they were just looking. And it seemed calm, you know. People weren't, from what I saw, people weren't running away. People were walking.
This is the live picture where you saw two World Trade Center towers standing only an hour ago, and just one of them remaining.
I see Giuliani and all his like security. I think fire commissioner was there. Kerrick was there, and I was like, oh, let me get some shots of this guy walking around, not knowing that he just came out of a building that collapsed. I had no idea. So I get over there and I start filming him, and I did it from a distance, thinking I know by the time I get over there, this cop, you know, security's gonna push me out of the way. But I see other camera crews trying to get close, so I said, well, you know, I'll sneak in right behind them. Don't ask me how, but I get right in front of Giuliani. So it's me, a couple of radio reporters on my right, I think some print guys on my left, and I'm right in the center, and here's Giuliani with Sonny Mandel, Carrick, Von Essen, all these guys coming towards me, and I'm right in front of them. I can't remember what block. We're walking up the block. I'm walking backwards. No one's with me. I'm by myself. And I guess Giuliani noticed the mic flag, and he asked, hey, are you live? Yeah, I'm live. Sure.
Everyone in the city should remain calm. The very best thing to do right now would be to remain home. If you're outside of southern Manhattan, you should remain where you are. You shouldn't panic. You shouldn't worry. We're doing the best that we can to evacuate southern Manhattan below Canal Street. If you are in southern Manhattan below Canal Street, you should walk north and get out of southern Manhattan. And the police and the fire need all of the room and all of the space possible to try to evacuate the people at the World Trade Center. This is a terrible tragedy. The best way we're going to get through this is if we remain calm and just listen to everyone, not to panic. We've communicated with the White House. They are doing the best they can to secure the airspace around the city. We've already seen military aircraft, our military aircraft up in the air. So people should remain calm. They should remain where they are, except if they are in southern Manhattan. If you're below Canal Street, you should walk out of southern Manhattan and walk north, as these people are doing right here.
There have to be questions on the part of the fire department at this point about the structural integrity of that building and whether they want to send any people in. Because they try to respond to these things by sending firefighters up the stairs to fight the fire, but when you're talking about an explosion of this magnitude, that amount of jet fuel up there, they would have to ask themselves questions about whether they want to send those men in to fight the fire or just let it burn itself out. As soon as you saw the first tower fall, you knew clearly that the second one was in danger. I mean, if not from the impact of the plane at the top, from this debris that had fallen and maybe damaged the structure at the bottom. So if there was any doubt about the danger of being down there, that was gone in that flash, that moment. And the urgency of the situation moved up several levels in a story that you thought had already taken on as much of a sense of urgency as anything that you'd covered, because now you just had the sense that the clock was ticking on the other tower. There is no subway service in New York City. All subway service throughout the 5 boroughs has been suspended as a precaution after this terrorist attack at the World Trade Center. Andrew Kurtzman, our political reporter, had managed to get himself right down in the center of where the city officials had gathered.
There's a policeman just screaming at me, get off the street, it's not safe, get off the street. And I'm like, just 1 second, officer, I need to file this report. And finally, it took too long. I hung up, I said I'd call him back later. And I walked down the street and I turned to the same cop and I said, do you know where Giuliani is? And he said, yeah, he's 2 blocks away. I said, he's 2 blocks away? He said, yeah, he's right there. And Giuliani is covered in white dust. He's with Tom Von Essen, the fire commissioner, Bernie Carrick, the police commissioner, Tony Coles, a bunch of his aides, and just about maybe 2 reporters, 1 cameraman. So we're walking up Church Street as he's trying to kind of collect himself, figure out where they should go next. And suddenly I hear a rumble behind me and I look back and Tower 1 is coming down. I look at Giuliani, who sees it, and this plainclothes cop, this detective, throws his arm around Giuliani and just grabs him and bolts. And suddenly we are all running north up Church Street to avoid this mushroom cloud which is chasing us now from the destruction of the World Trade Center.
I see an ambulance from St. Vincent's Hospital come down. At that moment when it passes by, I pan up to the building. And right there in front of the lens, in front of my eyes, the building, you just saw a whole floor blow out, and then the building just toppled.
Holy shit!
A big tidal wave of dust just shoots up Church Street. You know, and it's just sucking people in. You see people running, and the cloud just engulfs them.
We sensed after the first tower collapsed that it would just be a matter of time before the second tower collapsed. What would be different? I didn't think it would happen so soon, because the second tower, the north tower, the plane hit the North Tower higher than it hit the South Tower. So we thought that the structure, the South Tower, was the damage was further, more weight obviously on the impact zone, and therefore it crumbled first. Didn't think the North Tower would come down, but by the time it did, we were prepared for it, so to speak, and we were closer to the truck than the first time, and were able to, almost like the people who were with us the first time, some left, some stayed. The second tower collapsed, and those of us who were outside simply just went back into the truck and waited for the debris cloud to hit us again.
A gentleman was moving past me, and I remember catching this on tape, with a walkie-talkie telling people to move north, move everyone north. I still couldn't grasp that this could be because the other tower was going to fall.
Keep moving north! Keep moving north! Keep moving north!
Word from Pittsburgh that another large plane has crashed, a plane going down in western Pennsylvania. Officials at the Somerset County Airport in western Pennsylvania near Pittsburgh say another large plane has crashed there. It was pretty clear when we heard about the Pentagon crash what had happened there, that it was another target of one of these planes. It wasn't so clear with the crash in Pennsylvania, because we heard that a plane had gone down apparently in a field, and it wasn't clear until hours or days later that there had been this struggle on board the plane with the passengers and the hijackers fighting for control of the plane. So all we knew initially was that somewhere in Pennsylvania a plane had crashed, and we didn't initially know whether it was coincidental or whether in fact it was related, and it really wasn't clear from the beginning what the destination of that plane was, only that another jet had gone down in a morning of tragedy. This, of course, is primary day in New York City. We have just received word that election has been canceled or at least postponed. So there is no need to go to the polls today. They are going to make some sort of contingency to have that primary election on another day.
Giuliani was very impressive. He was kind of barking orders to his aides as to where to go. There was tremendous confusion about where to relocate City Hall. City Hall was deserted, evacuated. One police plaza was evacuated. There was no place to run the city from. And it wasn't until recently that I looked back and realized just how incredible it was. They didn't even have a car. We walked 2 miles north in order to find a place to relocate city government. Now we're walking north through these crowds, and they have now arrived at their destination of choice, which is a firehouse on 6th Avenue, just south of Houston Street. The first thing that Rudy Giuliani did when we got into that firehouse on 6th Avenue was he got on the phone with NY1 and he spoke to New Yorkers. It was the first phone call he made, I think, after calling the White House.
I was told that we were going to have an interview with Rudy Giuliani, that he'd agreed to talk to us. Not so much an interview as that he had something to say, and thought that NY1 was an obvious way to reach the people that he needed to. So we knew that this phone call was coming. I had 1,000 questions for Rudy Giuliani, but when he phoned And when he got on the line, it was very clear that he had things to say that took precedence over any questions I might have. So in a lot of ways, he took control of that interview. Mayor Giuliani, it's Pat Kernan. I'm with Sharon Deason-House here. I wonder if you could give us an update of the emergency operations right now, please.
The first thing I'd like to do is take this opportunity to tell everyone to remain calm and to the extent that they can to evacuate Lower Manhattan. Walk north. If you're in Lower Manhattan, walk north and get above Canal Street. Things will be a lot safer. We have as many police personnel and fire personnel as we can spare down there, and they'll help direct you out. But try to get out of Lower Manhattan.
Mayor Giuliani, we should stress, is there any immediate threat? This should be an orderly, calm evacuation at this point.
Right now, everyone should, other than Lower Manhattan, where people should evacuate, and the police and fire will help you, everybody else should remain calm. They should remain at work or in school. We don't want them all out there crowding things and making it difficult, because we're going to be moving people around to hospitals all over the city, and we need as much order as we possibly can get.
Mayor Giuliani, do you have any sense of the order of magnitude of injuries and deaths?
I do not, except to say that it's horrendous. I was down there and watched it and saw people jumping out of the World Trade Center. It's a horrible, horrible situation. I think right now what we have to focus on is saving as many of the people as we can save at this point.
We knew about dozens of triage teams ready in probably a dozen hospitals. And all the doctors and all the nurses and all the technicians were standing there waiting. And nobody came. And as you're hearing that information and realizing that these hospitals are not getting people, it was awful.
There was a succession of information that had come in: the crash at the Pentagon, airports closed, planes being diverted, bridges and tunnels being closed. There was just all this stuff happening, and it wasn't diverting our attention entirely from what was going on at the World Trade Center, but it suddenly meant that we were covering 10 stories at once. American Airlines, speaking euphemistically at this point, saying it has lost 2 of its aircraft. United Airlines says its Flight 93 originated at Newark, was en route to San Francisco, and it is the plane that crashed near Pittsburgh. The Associated Press, speaking to an unnamed police official, says the number of Trade Center casualties unknown, but could be in the thousands. Now that the United Nations building has been evacuated, another precautionary measure in the city that they have taken.
I remember trying to describe the ash that was on the floor, and I didn't want to touch it. So I was looking around at something I could touch, and there was this piece of pound cake. I'll never forget why, how it was just sitting there. Somebody's lunch fell when they were running, and there was this piece of pound cake. And I remember picking it up and just walking to a car and brushing the ash along the car, and we were getting some sound bites from some witnesses, at which point a police officer came up to us while we were on the air and said, "There's a methane leak. Get out of here."
We are being told right now, for our own safety by the police department, that we do need to stop this transmission. Apparently there is some sort of a gas leak, and it apparently is heading in our direction. So at the advice of the NYPD, we're going to sign off from here. Reporting live from Battery Park City, I'm John Schumo. Back to the newsroom.
We had a photographer come into the studio, and it was the first person to come back who'd been there. And to see this guy who looked like he'd seen a ghost, but not a ghost, a thousand ghosts, the fear and the sadness in his face was overwhelming. And it was a photographer who'd lost his assistant. And he was absolutely wretched and heartbroken and terrified.
I arrived with my assistant after the first tower had collapsed. And we were about like a block or two blocks away, photographing the emergency service people. And as we looked up, the second tower exploded. Huge flames started going, and everyone just started screaming, "Run, run!" And we were running with the firemen north up on the West Side Highway. It was like a tornado was coming. You just heard the noise, and I went under one fire truck with a fireman, and he went under another one, and it was just dark. You couldn't breathe. It was just black and black. You just couldn't breathe. And then the fireman kept telling me, just cool, be cool. We're gonna get out of this. We'll get out. We'll get out. Just stay with me. And then he helped drag me out. He's a hero. But we need, if Kevin Johnson, if you hear me, please call home or work. I couldn't, and if anyone in an emergency room sees this, I couldn't find my assistant. We couldn't find him. If you hear this, Kevin, please call work or home to tell us you're okay. If anyone in an emergency room, please. It's so important.
Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested, but make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this